So now we have mandatory Q&A. How can I help? In the back.
What does your typical day look like when you wake up to
Today?
Yeah, or even when you're after.
So he's asking what my sort of typical day is like. My typical day, I work from home most days. And again, I do a lot of agency project work. I try to do that about half time. And so if I don't need to go to my actual agency's office to do that work, I get up probably around 9 o'clock and I work on whatever I need to work on there. And to understand how a typical day works for me, I have to go into how a typical week works for me. I start my week planning out the things that need to get accomplished that week. And I try to time block as much of that as I can into my calendar. I try to identify the mandatories, the things that I have to do, and then schedule around that. And then for any given day, it's really just looking at what am I trying to get done today and trying to prioritize my most profitable work first and trying to let non-essential things truly slide. So yeah, it's not super glamorous necessarily, but the thing that I like most about the way that I work is I have an immense amount of control over my time. And so if I want to get up at 10 o'clock in the morning and work until 8 o'clock at night, I can do that. But no 2 days are typically the same for me. I do try to have as much routine as I can, but lately, especially with a lot of things that have been going on with me, I've not been able to do that. Yeah?
What would you, at the time, think of the three most influential books that you've read in this time?
Sure. The Obstacle is the Way by Ryan Holiday. I read that book right before taking on a super gnarly project, and I succeeded only because I had read that book ahead of time. The sort of spiritual sequel to that book is Ego is the Enemy, also by Ryan Holiday. I read that book right before I got laid off. And that was, again, perfect timing. Third book for me would be Anti-Fragile by Nicholas Taleb. It's part of a whole series on a very different way of thinking. I don't agree with him on everything, but when I did decide to, when I got laid off, when I decided not to just pursue another day job, part of that was because of, he gives an example in his book about two brothers, one who's a cab driver and one who's like a corporate type guy. And the cab driver has a lot of volatility in his work. So he has ups and downs, he can be busy, he can be slow. If you map his like revenue, it's all over the place. Whereas the brother who works like the corporate job, his stuff is really stable, it's really flat, it's really easy to expect. He knows how much his paychecks are gonna be and when they're gonna show up. But in the story, because the cab driver is like taking his volatility all the time, he's pretty well insulated from like some big disruptive event, you know, short of like Uber and Lyft. But any sort of singular event, like totally disrupting the way that he earns his living. Whereas like the steady guy can get laid off, and it is actually a big deal for him. And so what I wanted to experiment with in becoming self-employed was to embrace that volatility, because supposedly the trade-off is greater long-term stability. And so far that's working out for me. There are three people that have a nice sort of chain of connection for me. Those are Adam Savage, Tom Sachs, and Casey Neistat. And the only reason I know about Tom Sachs is because of Adam Savage. The only reason I know about Casey Neistat is because of Tom Sachs. Adam is the quintessential jack of all trades. The reason that he was able to do what he did on Mythbusters is because he already knew how to build stuff. And he already was interested in storytelling, and he was already like dying to be in front of the camera. Tom Sachs is a sculptor who works mostly in bricolage, you know, found stuff, plywood, you know, fiberglass, things like that. And his art is amazing because it's kind of grounded in his desire to build the things that he doesn't have. And that has included an entire NASA space program, which has a whole performance art thing. Like his stuff is absolutely amazing and inspiring. And the only person he follows on YouTube is Casey Neistat, who as a filmmaker, as a creator, as a human being, as a workaholic, there's so many things to admire about that guy and his hustle. So those are my 3 in 1. Yes?
So you talked about your refusal to specialize and not being a T person. I recently received a
bullshit.
How do you justify that to employers for the day job?
I gave an IXDA keynote a couple of years ago, where I went into this in depth, and I'm sorry, I don't have the graphic with me. But if the T-shaped person, and I'm sorry to repeat his question, he's being told to become a T-shaped person, and I think that's a terrible idea. The typical T-shaped person is to be shallow in a wide range of areas, have a wide range of interest, which basically just boils down to be sort of aware of the world around you. That's not good enough. And then you go deep in one area of expertise. Now the problem is, it gets us into that 100% versus 80-20 type situation, is that when you go super deep in just one area of expertise, you do at some point, you pass a point of like sort of usefulness, where like, okay, here's the point at which I know everything I know to be very effective in my job, outside of related skills like soft skills and presentation skills and the other things that have nothing to do with your actual area of expertise unless you're a professional speaker. There's a point at which continuing to dive deep into that doesn't actually make you effectively any better at your job. And all it does is tend to anchor you deeper and deeper into that thing, so that is now the only thing you're qualified to do. And in especially like kind of today's market and all the volatility that there is in culture and everything else, I think that's actually a risky proposition to put all of your eggs in that one basket. And so understanding that expertise and being a very skilled person in a lot of different areas is not as difficult as we assume it is. The metaphor I like to use is to become a bridge-shaped person. So instead of drilling deep into like a single area of expertise, it's to stand up pylons of expertise and make connections between those, because therein you create a lot of your own luck, coming back to some of the other things I was talking about. So yes, you do have to reach a certain level of proficiency, and especially if you're early in your career and you're trying to get started in design or in whatever, you are going to need to focus and build that expertise. But my recommendation would be, do it Tim Ferriss style. Do the analysis, figure out what 20% of skills and knowledge in that subject area are the critical ones, get super good at that, and then branch out. Anybody else? Sure. The thing that I found is the most effective is to get to work. Casey Neistat, in one of his videos, has this great metaphor that he uses where he says, for me, motivation is not a problem, because there's where I am and there is where I want to be. And all that is between these two things is a bunch of work. And I believe that wholeheartedly. And for me, I find when I'm lacking motivation or when I'm stuck, it's because I've lost sight of where I'm trying to go. So it was very important to me, and I hopefully I've succeeded in this, it was very important to me that this talk not suck. And I've been working on this since like November, maybe, but it didn't really materialize until Tuesday. And I'm having a very, very busy week, and I needed to spend time on this, but I had other things that needed to happen as well. I had a group of wireframes I needed to do. And so like it was not, in order for me to work on this and have time to work on this, it was not an option for me to be stuck when I was working on those wireframes. So knowing where you're trying to go and like making sure that you actually want to go there and letting that be the sort of fount of your motivation is very powerful. Yeah. There at the back.
Kind of building off that question, like sometimes when you get stuck, it's like you're bored with it, or it's just getting hard. How do you know, like, when it's time to start learning new skills, or when it's time to like keep working on that one and you're just running into like a roadblock?
So I always have so many irons in the fire that there's always something for me to switch to. And I have only lately become more strategic about the things that I want to learn. But for the most part, like for what brought me here, it's just been following my enthusiasm. It's like I'm kind of a hoarder, but of ideas and skills instead of garbage. And that just it makes me more acceptable to society, but it's probably no less pathological. You had a question.
Yeah, when you are learning a new skill, do you immerse yourself in that to get that knowledge? Is that how you learn that skill?
Usually, I pick up skills as part of doing a particular project. So I like to build stuff in my workshop, and one of the things that I'm slowly working on is I want to do a replica of Thor's hammer from the movies of Mjolnir, but I want to build it out of steel. And so in order to do that, I'm going to have to learn how to engrave. I'm going to have to learn how to be a better welder than I currently am. I'm going to have to learn how to build a jig to hold that in place as I weld that box together so that it doesn't warp. I'm going to have to learn more about leather work than I already know. I'm going to have to learn how to stamp aluminum. I'm going to have to learn how to do molding and casting. And so like, I don't know how to do any of that shit. But that project affords me the opportunity to try and fail and try and fail and try and fail and try to fail. And that right there is, I think, also a super important concept, that anything new that you're trying to do, again, coming back to mind versus mindset, be willing to do it 5 times. Like, your first grilled cheese sandwich is always terrible. Your first pancake is always bad. Your first attempt at doing anything new is going to be terrible. Keep going. Do the same thing over and over and over again. So I will probably end up building 3 or 4 of those hammers, or at least pieces. Like, I'll build the handle 3 or 4 times. I'll build the box probably 3 or 4 times before I get enough pieces that I'm happy with. And I just know that's going to happen. I'm just going to go ahead and buy that much material, set aside that much time, and be willing to iterate and iterate and iterate and iterate. But in terms of any sort of really intentional way by which I would go about learning a skill, it's just to get in there and start doing it and learn it on the job, so to speak. Yeah. Okay, this last one, you better make it count.
Okay, so back when you were working full-time, and then you also had side businesses, and you're learning all this stuff, it sounds like that's a lot of work, a lot of time in your day-to-day. I'm wondering, like, what things that normal people do were you giving up during that time, or what were you sacrificing?
The simple answer to that question is that I read Tim Ferriss's The 4-Hour Workweek, and I figured out how to do my day job in less time. And I figured out how to also do these other things that I was pursuing as effectively and as efficiently as I could. And so, yeah, Brene Brown wrote an amazing book on creativity called Big Magic, and everyone in here should read it twice. And she talks about how for your art, for the thing that you really want to do, it should be like your mistress. You should be stealing time away from your primary commitments as much as you can get away with in order to, sneak into the stairwell and make out with the thing that you really want to be doing. So that's the best advice I would have for you on that. Thank you.